What do you do when you've got footage like this? It's been shot on a cell phone. The colors are just completely all off. The background that's supposed to be black is like blue. The face that's supposed to be brown looks yellow. The cap that's supposed to be white looks off-white, yellowish, and you need to fix that. How do you do it? This video, I'm going to show you how you can potentially salvage footage that either you yourself messed up shooting or somebody shot it, didn't dial in their settings right, and so now you're left to fix it in post. This is how we do it. I'm gonna walk you through tactically on how to fix in post a particular footage. I believe this was shot on a cell phone and then uploaded to Vimeo and then sent over to me. It's already gone through some compression. It's not going to be the best quality. Essentially, I am trying to fix internet video. If this is your first time here, my name is Belal Khan, and my aim for this channel and the videos that I put out is to leave you with some sort of skill, knowledge, or inspiration to help you unleash your creativity and make your ideas real. If that sounds like something that's good for you, go ahead and subscribe, hit that like button. But before you do all that, I want you to leave a comment below. Tell me how you're doing today, and we'll go from there. Let's say you found yourself with footage that looks like this, right? How do you fix it? What I'm going to lay down for you in this particular video are principles, right? Every application is going to be a little bit different. If you happen to use Premiere, you can follow this step by step exactly how I do it in terms of my process. But if you don't use Premiere, let's say you're using Final Cut or you're using something else, your ability to do what I'm doing here is still in those other applications. It's just a question of the settings and the controls are going to be a little bit different from software to software. In an ideal scenario, it helps when the footage that you get is raw. This video I'm recording is 10-bit, right, on my GH5, which gives me plenty of color resolution if I need to adjust something, whatnot. But even if I've dialed in my settings, that's not going to be that big of an issue. However, if you shot something on your cell phone, there's going to be limitations as to how much and what you can do. So a win for me is going to be to see whether or not I can at least correct the color. That's what we're trying to do with this footage today. Let's say you've opened up your project, you bring that into your timeline. Premiere is going to ask you to match the clip to the sequence. I'm just going to go ahead and do that. So change my sequence settings. From here, I pull up the timeline a little bit so I can see the clip. The first thing that I like to do in this particular stage is use a tool called Lumetri. And so if you go to effects, you type in LUM and you see a bunch of different Lumetri presets. I typically work with the first one that comes up. Simply take that 2-strip, drag it right onto the timeline in terms of the footage that I've selected. From there, I go to effects controls. The first thing I'm gonna do, I'm gonna start with basic correction. Typically what's off is white balance, right? This is a 1080p clip. What I wanna do is I want to correct the white balance first. There's really two things that are supposedly white: the eyeball and the hat. I'm not sure if the hat is white, so what I'm going to try to do is this: select from white balance, WB selector, select the eyedropper, and literally just bring it over to the eyeball, and boom, you will see that a lot of the color has already come back. Right? That's what you call white balancing. There's a couple things here that seem a little bit off right now. I can see that he's been lit up by LED lights. That's why it's very, very white, and that's fine. What I want to do is I'm going to go straight to highlights and shadows, right? I want to see if I can recover as much of the highlights as possible. The brightest portion of this entire clip is his hat. So from here, I take the highlights and I simply bring it down. Now what happens if I bring it out too much, you'll see that certain areas, like we know this over here, there's not much information left in terms of dynamic range. Right on his face over here, these are areas that are overexposed, right? So it doesn't matter what I do, there's not going to be much left here. So I want to drag this only as much until, well, in fact, if I drag this even a little bit, you'll see that the image is already falling apart. So I'm just going to go ahead and reset the highlights. But typically that's where I want to start. If there's enough information, I'll be able to recover some of it. Let me see if I could take the exposure, bring that down a little bit. As soon as I bring that exposure down, I see that his face is turning yellow. Like his face, this is like, looks really, really weird. So let's see if we can do something with the shadows, right? Bring the shadows down. It's still very, the front is still a little, I mean, I guess that's as much as I can do here. Now keep in mind, we're attempting to fix this in post, and this is going to be a bit tricky. So let's see what happens if we take blacks and we want to crush the blacks a little bit. And yeah, we're able to do that, and it seems to bring about some contrast. Now the issue is this: normally when you have a black background, or if you have any black background and you're trying to shoot it, you want to light that separately if you're going to light it at all. In the case of a black background, you really don't want to light it because it's supposed to be black. As soon as you start adding lights to it, or you or whoever is going to be on camera, they're too close to the background, then what ends up happening is the background, there's not going to be much separation between whoever's on camera, the subject, and the background itself. At this point, we're going to end up making the background a part of the scene, so to speak, right? So we're not gonna, so right away off the bat, I know I'm not going to be able to black out the background. What I could do is change up the colors a little bit. I'm looking at temperature and tint. His face is still seeming a little bit yellow, and that became apparent when I brought down the highlights, right? Even if I bring down the highlights a little bit, you can see that his face goes a little yellow. His face is not yellow. So what I could do is I could bring the temperature down a little bit more, but that just kind of gives it a significantly more blue tint than I would like it to have. The other options, I could play with the tint a little bit, but you know, that's more on the red and green area as opposed to blue and yellow. Now, this is where we tend to go to the creative side. Now, essentially, this is where we can play around with some of the vibrance and saturation. What I might do is I might reduce the saturation a little bit, but bump the vibrance. So this way I can maintain some of the skin tones, but reduce some of the oversaturation that might be taking place. That seems to help a little bit. Now in the highlight tint, I can even make the highlight tint a little bit more blue to balance out the yellow. And so now when I go back to highlights and I bring it down, see, he's not turning yellow. As you notice, right? Which is good. So we kind of corrected a little bit of that. In fact, I can bring the highlights down a little bit more, and it's actually looking not bad. From here, even if I play with the exposure, I can reduce the exposure a little bit. It's still not turning him. Like I bring it down here, now he's like yellowish green. So I don't want to mess with that too much. Now we have the shadows here. The other option is we just kind of leave the shadows where we had left it. Part of me says, you know what, bump up the shadows a little bit. The issue is that the way that he's lit, you know that the light source is very close to his face. And that's an issue because when the light source is very close to your face, the lighting is not soft. And I'll give you an example of this, right? Right now, my face is literally being lit by soft lights. Not by a soft box, but the light source itself is soft. It's not harsh. And this is the difference between, so this is a harsh light. Now it's looking similar to that. And now this is just my cell phone LED. And what a harsh light does, or if the light is too close to the subject's face, or the source of the light is too close, then what ends up happening is it creates a lot of dark or deep shadows. Or in his case, the light is probably like up here, and it ends up creating some deep shadows right under the eyebrows like that, which is not necessarily aesthetically in the area that you want to be. Generally speaking, when you're lighting a face, whether it's talking head or you taking a photo even, right? A portrait composition, that's what this is. It's a talking head portrait composition. You want the lights to be soft. Now there's not much I can do here. I can try to soften the shadows, and that's why I'm playing around with the shadows right now as a means of reducing that contrast. And this is the other thing that we can do is go to the contrast settings. Normally when you shoot in a picture profile, if you've got a fancy camera, you might go like into a log profile or a cinema type profile. In order to process that footage, then what I would typically do is I would increase the contrast like I'm doing here. But because there's already so much contrast here and the shadows are deep, what I want to do is I might reduce the contrast. There we go, just like that. And this softens up the light a little bit. And in this case, I might even reduce the exposure altogether, maybe. I might reduce the highlights a little bit more but if I do that a little bit more, I know the image is gonna start falling apart a little bit. I might even bump the shadows or not. You know what? I might just leave the shadows as they are. I've given up on the background. I'm not going to try to make the background black. In fact, I'm going to make him part of the background since he's very close to it. But I still want to create a little bit of contrast, at least a little bit of separation between him and the background, as well as his hair. And it takes a little bit of fiddling. What about color wheels and matching? Let's see. Oh, there we go. Midtones, shadows, and highlights. This might be helpful. So from here, let's go to midtones And what colors can we do? We can move the midtones to any particular area, and neither area is seeming a spot that I want it to be in. So what happens if I reduce the midtones in terms of their brightness? Let's reduce the brightness just a pinch. Shadows. What happens if I reduce the shadows a little bit more? It becomes a little bit more contrasty. And then we got the highlights. If we bump the highlights, it just becomes a little bit more harshly shot image. And if we bring highlights, make them a little bit yellow, no. Bring in green, no. Now it just becomes very bluish, purple. Let's bring it back to the center, but then bring the highlights back to normal. I think we'll be fine on this side. I wonder if there's such a thing as black balance because the black is what's seeming a little off. Let's add a vignette. It's a little too much. Let's see what happens if we play around with the roundness. That way, okay, so it's a little bit of a softer vignette. Can we add a little bit of feathering? So max out the feathering. We can change the midpoint. We could have the vignette come in a little bit more. So we started with this and we are here. Progress. The last step, just to kind of smooth it all out, because one of the things that you'll notice is very apparent. There's a lot of noise artifacts in here. This plugin is called noise reduction. Depending on the software that you have, you might have to buy it or it might come with it. But this is like my final thing, just to kind of smooth everything out. Go ahead and create this as another subsequence. So select this, make subsequence, boom, done. I'll take that, bring it back on top here. And so now when I apply the noise reduction, it's going to be applied to this particular layer. Let's click on effects. Let's go to Neat Video. That's the noise reduction software that I have. It costs maybe about $60. It's totally worth it, especially when you're working with cameras, whether it's cell phones or cheaper cameras that produce a lot of noise and you just want to reduce stuff, or you're shooting in low light and you get a lot of noise because you bump up the ISO. I know there's a lot of technical stuff that I just mentioned there. Essentially, whenever you make an image brighter than your camera is technically able to do, then what's going to end up happening is going to get noise. Like, you know, your old school TVs where you have the black and white army fighting because of signal. That's what it is. You're getting a lot of signal interference because there's not enough data. Your sensor is not able to capture that much light, and so therefore this noise and these artifacts are introduced. So one thing you could do is you could simply reduce that noise by smoothing it all out. Now, when you smooth things out, it makes the image look less sharp, but that's okay, because in this case, the image is already too sharp in terms of how it's been processed, because it's probably shot on a cell phone. So from here, I click reduce noise, I click on prepare, right? It's preparing the footage. From here, I click on build. All right, so once the thing pops up, just select an area that you want to noise reduce until you see it says good. Click on build profile. And as simple as that, click on adjust and preview. You can click on it. This is how it was before. This is how it is after. This is the key difference here. Just smooth things out. Click on apply. Done. Right? This is what we ended up with. This is where we started. This is how we ended. Started, ended. In summary of all the steps that you bring into your timeline, the first thing that you want to apply is the color correction, which I do in Premiere using Lumetri. Right? Once you apply Lumetri, start with the basic settings. Check your white balance. If your white balance is on point, then you can kind of play around with things like contrast, highlights, shadows, your blacks and your whites. And then once you've got that dialed in, then you move on to things like vibrance and saturation to play around with the colors. Typically though, if you shoot on anything that's 8-bit or less, your cell phone will shoot 8-bit or lower. A lot of these cheap cameras that are under $1,000 will shoot like at 8-bit. If you go above $1,000, typically you may want to look at whether or not it shoots at 10-bit, like on the GH5, I can shoot at 10-bit. My Canon EOS M, right? It's a photo camera that also does video, old school. I have a hack on here called Magic Lantern, which allows me to shoot 14-bit raw video at 1080p. That's why if you shoot raw images on photo, you can restore and reclaim a lot of the data that's maybe seemingly lost in the highlights that are blown out, or in the shadows that are crushed, or in the colors that may be muted or desaturated, but you can bring that all out if it's raw. But stuff that's shot on the cell phone, you don't have that option. typically, unless you have a special app which you tell your cell phone to do that, but then you talk about getting technical. But if you're not somebody who's technical, then your ability to play around with vibrance, saturation, highlights, shadows is going to be limited. Like in this case, the background is supposed to be black, but it's too lit, essentially, right? The background needs to be further away from the subject in order for it to be not that visible. And even if it is lit, like I can see all of the little wrinkles and stuff like that within the backdrop. Either it has to be stretched out properly, ironed out, or it's got to be blurred out. Now, even if you've dialed in your white balance and contrast settings and it's still not there yet, that's where you want to play around with the nuance controls. Micro adjustments, you don't have to go crazy, just to kind of bring the image to where you want it to be. And then from there, you can play around with adding a vignette or not. At least in this case, I felt like there was already kind of a vignette, but it was a noisy vignette and it was not a clean vignette. And so after desaturating the image a little bit and reducing the contrast of the image, adding a vignette, and then finally going in there and applying a noise reduction, right? And that is to kind of smooth out the image as best as I can. Again, we started here, right? And we ended here. Keep in mind, as soon as you apply noise reduction, the amount of time it's going to take for the machine to render is going to exponentially increase, but at least you'll end up with a good end product or an acceptable end product that you can work with. Yeah, that's it for today, guys. I'll see you soon.